I was standing in the hotel bathroom when my phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. The words were simple, direct, almost clinical. "Don't sleep with your husband tonight." My hands started shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone into the sink. This was 2 months after we buried our son. 2 months of moving through fog, of waking up and forgetting for half a second that he was gone, then remembering all over again. And now this. I stared at those words until they blurred. Behind the bathroom door, I could hear my husband Mark ordering room service, his voice calm, familiar, the same voice that had held me through our darkest days. But that text message sat there on my screen like a grenade with the pin pulled. "Let me take you back 3 months, to before everything shattered, before the funeral. Before I knew what my husband had really been doing with our money, back when I still believed in the life we'd built together. We lived in a 3-bedroom colonial in Phoenix, the kind with a front porch that caught the evening breeze, and a backyard where our son Danny had learned to ride his bike. Mark worked in commercial real estate. I taught 3rd grade for 28 years before retiring. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. We had plans. Mark talked about buying an RV when we both retired, driving cross-country, seeing national parks. I'd already started a Pinterest board of campgrounds and scenic routes. That's what I thought our future looked like. 2 people who'd weathered life's storms together, finally getting to enjoy the calm. Danny's death from a car accident that spring changed everything. He was 26. He'd just gotten engaged. The funeral was on a Tuesday, and I remember thinking how wrong that felt. Like Tuesdays were for grocery shopping and dentist appointments, not for burying your only child. Mark held my hand through the entire service. He spoke at the reception. He was the strong one while I could barely form sentences. Everyone kept saying how lucky I was to have such a supportive husband during the worst time of my life. 2 weeks after the funeral, we went to that banking conference in downtown Phoenix, the one Mark had to attend for work. I didn't want to go. I didn't want to do anything, but our grief counselor said routine might help, and Mark insisted he needed me there. So I packed a bag and tried to act like a person who still functioned in the world. That's when the text came, the night before Mark's big presentation. I walked out of that bathroom and looked at my husband sitting on the hotel bed, scrolling through his tablet, and I felt like I was seeing a stranger. The message had included no explanation, no context, just that warning. I wanted to show it to him right then, to laugh about it together, some cruel prank or wrong number. But something stopped me. Maybe it was the precision of the timing. Maybe it was something in my gut that had been whispering for months that I'd been too grief-stricken to hear. I made an excuse about needing air and went down to the hotel lobby. My hands were still shaking as I tried to call the number back. It went straight to a generic voicemail. I sat in one of those oversized lobby chairs and stared at my phone until a new message came through from the same number. "Check your joint account, the withdrawals. He's been gambling. You're about to lose everything. You know that feeling when you're in an elevator and it drops too fast? That stomach lurch sensation? That's what hit me. Because suddenly, little things started clicking into place. The way Mark had been handling all our finances since Danny died, insisting I didn't need to worry about bills or accounts. How he'd suggested I take his name off my teacher's pension, said it would be simpler for taxes. The nights he said he was working late, coming home smelling like cigarette smoke even though he'd quit years ago. I want you to understand something. When you're drowning in grief, when getting out of bed feels like climbing a mountain, you're not paying attention to bank statements. You're not questioning why your husband is suddenly so interested in managing money. You're just trying to survive each day. And the people who love you, who you trust, they're supposed to help you through that darkness. They're not supposed to use it as cover. I didn't sleep that night. I lay next to Mark in that hotel bed, listening to him breathe, and I felt like I was lying next to a bomb. Every time he shifted, I tensed. When morning came and he got up to shower, I grabbed his phone from the nightstand. I knew his passcode. We'd never had secrets. Or so I thought. The gambling apps were right there on his home screen, not even hidden. 4 different ones. I opened the first and saw the transaction history going back 8 months. Thousands of dollars, tens of thousands. I opened the second app. More of the same. My vision started tunneling. I could hear the shower running, could hear Mark humming something. He was humming while our entire life was collapsing. For weeks after Danny died, I'd questioned everything about myself. Had I been a good enough mother? Should I have called him that night, told him not to drive? I'd replayed every conversation, every moment, torturing myself with what-ifs. And now I was questioning my sanity again. Had I really seen what I thought I'd seen on that phone? Was my grief making me paranoid? Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe I was wrong. That's what they do to you. The people who betray you. They make you doubt your own eyes, your own memory, your own reality. I'd taught 3rd graders for nearly 3 decades. I could spot a lie from across a classroom. But when it's someone you've loved for 32 years, someone who held your hand through childbirth and job losses and now the death of your child, your brain doesn't want to accept what it's seeing. It fights against the truth because the truth is too devastating. I put his phone back exactly where I'd found it. When Mark came out of the bathroom, I was sitting on the edge of the bed, and I asked him straight out, "Are we okay financially?" He looked at me with such concern, such tenderness. "Honey, why are you worrying about that? I've got everything handled. You just focus on healing." Then he kissed my forehead like I was a child who needed reassurance. I'd given up everything for our stability. After Danny was born, I'd turned down a position as assistant principal because Mark's job required long hours and travel. I'd been the one to handle all the home stuff, all the parenting stuff, while he built his career. And I'd been happy to do it. That was our partnership. He earned, I nurtured. When his mother got sick, I was the one who took family leave to care for her. When his father died, I planned the entire funeral because Mark was too overwhelmed. I'd poured 32 years into this marriage, into this life, believing we were building something solid, something that would last. Our house in the Arcadia neighborhood had been my mother's. She'd left it to me when she passed 6 years ago. It was paid off, worth about $400,000 in the current market. It had the original hardwood floors and a kitchen I'd renovated myself, learning to tile from YouTube videos. Danny's bedroom was still exactly as he'd left it. His high school baseball trophies on the shelf, his college textbooks stacked on the desk. I hadn't been able to touch any of it yet. Mark had suggested, about a month after the funeral, that we should consider a home equity line of credit. For renovations, he said. To give us something to focus on besides grief. I'd signed the papers without really reading them. I trusted him. Why wouldn't I? He was my husband, the father of my child, the man who'd held me while I sobbed into his shirt night after night. I spent the rest of that conference weekend acting normal, going to dinners, smiling at Mark's colleagues, playing the role of the supportive wife, but I was screaming inside. Every time Mark touched my hand or called me sweetheart, I wanted to throw up. And every time I looked at him, I wondered who he really was. Had our entire marriage been a lie? Or had grief and gambling broken something in him that used to be real? You're probably yelling at your screen right now, telling me I should have confronted him immediately, that I should have grabbed my purse and left that hotel. But here's what you need to understand about betrayal this deep. It doesn't just break your heart. It breaks your entire sense of reality. Everything you thought you knew becomes suspect. Every memory gets reframed. That anniversary trip to San Diego 5 years ago when Mark said he had to step out for a work call. Maybe he was gambling. That time he said his Christmas bonus was smaller than expected. Maybe it never existed. You start to question whether anything was ever real. When we got home from Phoenix, I went straight to my laptop. I logged into our joint checking account, the one we'd had since we got married. The balance showed $3,200. We'd had $47,000 in that account the week of Danny's funeral. I checked the transaction history. Withdrawal after withdrawal. Cash ATM transactions at casinos. Transfers to online gambling sites. The most recent withdrawal was from 2 days ago. $5,000. I sat at our kitchen table, the same table where we'd had family dinners for 26 years, where Danny had done his homework, and where we'd signed the papers to refinance our house. And I felt something inside me go cold. Not sad, not angry. Cold. Like something had frozen solid and would never thaw again. The savings account was worse. We'd been putting away money for years. Inheritance from Mark's parents, my pension contributions. The plan was this money would supplement our retirement, let us travel, help Danny with a down payment on his first house someday. There was supposed to be $160,000 in that account. The balance showed $8,300. My body started doing this thing where I couldn't catch my breath. My chest got tight. My vision narrowed. I gripped the edge of the table and tried to remember what the grief counselor had said about panic attacks. But this wasn't grief. This was something else entirely. This was the realization that everything I'd sacrificed, everything I'd believed in, had been a lie. The man sleeping in our bedroom upstairs had gambled away our future. While I was burying our son, while I was drowning in the worst pain imaginable, he'd been bleeding our accounts dry. I want you to think about that for a second. While I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, could barely function, he was placing bets. While I was going through Danny's baby photos and trying to write a eulogy that would somehow capture 26 years of love, he was on his phone gambling away the money we'd saved to help Danny buy his first house. The money that would never help Danny now because Danny was gone. And Mark was using my grief as cover to destroy us financially. Later, I'd read that 85% of people say financial infidelity affected their relationship. 85%. But in that moment, sitting alone in my kitchen at 2 a.m, I wasn't thinking about statistics. I was thinking about how many times I'd defended Mark to my friends when they said he worked too much. How many times I'd made excuses when he missed Danny's games or school events. How I'd believed in us even when things got hard. I checked the home equity line of credit. Mark had maxed it out. $120,000 borrowed against my mother's house. The house that was supposed to be Danny's someday. The house that held every memory of the life we'd built. According to the payment schedule, we'd already missed 2 months. Foreclosure proceedings could start within 90 days. Do you know what it feels like to realize you're about to lose your home? Not because of a layoff or medical bills or any of the normal reasons people lose their homes, but because the person you trusted most in the world had gambled it away? It's like standing on sand that's being pulled out from under your feet by the tide. You know you're going under, and there's nothing to grab onto. I couldn't confront him yet. I needed proof. I needed to understand the full scope of what he'd done. So I started digging. Bank statements, credit card bills. I found a credit card I didn't even know existed, maxed out at $30,000. Charges at casinos in Las Vegas, Atlantic City, even a riverboat casino in Louisiana. Times when Mark had said he was at business conferences. Maybe some of those trips were conferences. But I'd bet money, no pun intended, that most of them were gambling trips. I found a payday loan in his name. $15,000 at an interest rate that made my head spin. I found a second mortgage on the house that I'd never signed for, somehow processed using an old power of attorney document from when I'd had surgery years ago. Every stone I turned over revealed something worse underneath. The man who'd vowed to love and cherish me, who'd stood next to me as we grieved our son, had methodically stripped away every bit of financial security we had. And he'd done it while looking me in the eye every day and telling me not to worry, that he had everything under control. I'm not going to lie to you. There were moments during those weeks where I thought about just giving up. The grief over Danny was already crushing me. Now this. It felt like too much. Like the universe was just piling on, seeing how much one person could take before they completely broke. I stood in Danny's room one night, surrounded by all his things, and I thought maybe it would be easier to just let it all go. Let Mark have what was left. Let the bank take the house, just walk away from all of it. But then I'd remember my mother. She'd been a legal secretary for 40 years. She'd bought this house by herself in the 70s, when banks didn't like giving mortgages to single women. She'd told me once that the worst thing you could do was let someone make you doubt your own worth. And I realized that's exactly what was happening. I was doubting myself, doubting whether I had the right to be angry, doubting whether I could survive this, doubting whether I was strong enough to fight back. Mark came home from work one evening, about 3 weeks after that text message, and asked what I wanted for dinner, like it was just another normal day, like he hadn't destroyed our entire life. I looked at him and said, "I want to understand why the bank called today about missed mortgage payments." You should have seen his face. He went through about 5 different expressions in 2 seconds. Surprise, panic, anger. Then he settled on concerned. "Honey, why are you even answering calls from the bank? I told you I'd handle all that. You're dealing with enough." He came over and tried to hug me. I stepped back. "Mark, we're 3 months behind on the mortgage. On my mother's house. The house that's paid off. Except it's not paid off anymore, is it?" He sat down on the couch and put his head in his hands. And for a second, I thought maybe he was finally going to tell me the truth. Maybe we could figure this out together. Maybe there was still something salvageable in this wreckage. Then he looked up at me and said, "I took out a small loan to help with Danny's funeral expenses. I didn't want you to worry about money on top of everything else. It got a little out of hand, but I'm taking care of it." That's when I knew for certain that he wasn't going to stop lying. Danny's funeral had cost $18,000, and we'd paid for it with life insurance money from a policy my parents had set up for him when he was born. Mark knew I knew that. He was lying to my face even when caught, gaslighting me into questioning what I knew to be true. "How much have you lost gambling?" I asked him directly. The silence that followed was deafening. You could hear the air conditioning clicking on. You could hear traffic outside. You could hear both of us breathing. Finally, he said, "I don't know what you're talking about." And I realized right then that I was on my own, that the marriage was over, that everything we'd built together was already gone, and I was just now seeing the rubble. I want to tell you that I kicked him out that night, that I screamed and threw things and demanded answers. But I didn't, because I was still processing, still trying to reconcile the man I'd loved for 3 decades with the man who could do this to us. And because, honestly, I didn't know what to do. I'd been a teacher. I understood lesson plans and parent-teacher conferences and classroom management. I didn't understand forensic accounting or asset protection or any of the things I was going to need to understand to survive this. That night, I lay in bed next to Mark, and I made a decision. I was going to stop doubting myself. I was going to stop letting him manipulate me. I was going to stop being paralyzed by grief and betrayal. I was going to fight, not just for the house or the money, but for myself, for my dignity, for the life my mother had built and left to me, for Danny's memory, which deserved better than this. The next morning, while Mark was in the shower, I transferred what was left in our checking account into a new account at a different bank, one in just my name, $3,200. It wasn't much, but it was something. Then I called the one person who that anonymous text had come from. The number was still in my phone. It rang 4 times, and I was about to hang up when someone answered. A woman's voice. "I was wondering when you'd call." She wouldn't tell me her name at first, just said she'd worked with Mark, that she'd seen what he was doing, and that she couldn't stay silent anymore. She'd watched him lose massive amounts of money, watched him borrow from loan sharks, watched him spiral. She'd sent the text because she knew I had no idea what was happening. She said she had documentation if I wanted it. Bank statements Mark had left on his desk, text messages about debts. She said she was willing to testify if it came to that, but she couldn't risk losing her own job by going public without me asking for help first. I met her at a coffee shop in Tempe 2 days later. She was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, with kind eyes and a nervous energy. She slid a manila folder across the table to me and said, "I'm sorry. I know this is awful." The folder contained printed emails between Mark and various casinos, players' club statements showing massive losses, and screenshots of conversations where he was begging people for loans. There was documentation of $140,000 lost in just the past year, a year that included our son's death, a year when I'd needed him most, a year when he'd held me and promised everything would be okay. And the whole time, he'd been hemorrhaging money we couldn't afford to lose. This woman, this stranger who owed me nothing, had done more to help me than my own husband. She'd risked her job, her reputation, to make sure I knew the truth. I asked her why. She said her mother had gone through something similar, had lost everything before she realized what was happening. She said she couldn't watch it happen to someone else if she had the power to prevent it. I'm telling you this because sometimes your ally comes from the most unexpected place. Sometimes the person who saves you is someone you've never met. Someone who sees your situation more clearly than the people who claim to love you. And you have to be willing to accept help, even when you're not sure you deserve it, or when your pride says you should handle everything alone. With that folder of evidence, I went to see a lawyer. Her name was Patricia Reeves, and her office was in a strip mall in Scottsdale. Nothing fancy. But she had 20 years of experience with family law and financial disputes. She looked through the documents I brought and let out a low whistle. "This is bad," she said, which wasn't exactly reassuring. "But it's not hopeless. We can fight this." She explained that Arizona is a community property state, which meant all debts incurred during the marriage were technically my responsibility too, even if I didn't know about them. But there were ways to prove I'd been defrauded, ways to show that Mark had acted in bad faith, ways to protect what was left. It wasn't going to be easy, it wasn't going to be quick, and it definitely wasn't going to be cheap. Her retainer alone was $5,000. I sat in her office and thought about that number. $5,000 I didn't really have. $5,000 that would have felt like nothing back when our accounts were full. $5,000 that represented a huge gamble on my part that this would work out, that justice existed, that I could actually win against someone who'd had a years-long head start on destroying our finances. Then I thought about my mother working 40 years to buy that house. I thought about every report card conference I'd attended, every curriculum meeting, every parent who'd trusted me with their child's education. I thought about the life I'd built, brick by brick, and I thought about Mark systematically tearing it down, and I wrote the check. Patricia filed for legal separation the next day. Not divorce yet, just separation, which would start the process of separating our assets and debts. We also filed a complaint with the State Gaming Commission about problem gambling, which created an official record of Mark's addiction. And we started building a case for financial fraud, proving that he'd used my power of attorney illegally and had hidden debts from me. Mark got served the papers at work. I wasn't there, but Patricia said the process server reported he looked shocked, like he couldn't believe I'd actually done it, like he'd thought he could keep this going forever, keep lying, keep gambling, and I'd just keep accepting it. Part of me wishes I'd been there to see his face when reality finally hit him. He came home that night, and I was waiting in the kitchen. I'd packed his clothes and put them in the garage. I'd changed the locks, which Patricia said was legal once the separation papers were filed. He stood on the front porch, and I talked to him through the screen door. "You need to leave," I said. My voice was steady. I was proud of that. "Susan, we need to talk about this. You're not thinking clearly. You're grieving. This isn't the time for big decisions." Even then, even caught, even served with legal papers, he was still trying to manipulate me, still trying to make me doubt my own judgment. And you know what? A month ago, that might have worked. But I'd seen the numbers. I'd talked to lawyers. I'd accepted that the man I married was gone, if he'd ever existed at all. "We're done talking," I told him. "You have two choices. You can fight this and air everything publicly, or you can cooperate and maybe we can settle quietly. But either way, you're not coming back into this house." He stood there for a long moment, and I saw anger flicker across his face. Not remorse, not shame. Anger that I wasn't playing along anymore. Then he picked up his suitcase and left. The next few weeks were a blur of legal proceedings, financial documents, and revelations that kept getting worse. Patricia discovered that Mark had borrowed money from 3 different colleagues, promising to pay them back from a big deal that was closing. He owed a total of $60,000 to people at his office. He'd also maxed out credit cards in Danny's name, using our son's social security number, our dead son's name. That one almost broke me. The idea that he'd use Danny's identity, that he'd violate our child's memory that way, it was unconscionable. According to AARP, 72% of stolen money is taken by people the victim knows, family members, spouses, friends, the people who have access to your accounts, your trust, your social security numbers. I was part of that 72%, and I hadn't even known it. That's how insidious financial abuse is. It happens in your own home, perpetrated by the person sleeping next to you, and you don't see it until you're already drowning. We filed a criminal complaint for identity theft for what he'd done using Danny's information. We also reported the fraudulent use of my power of attorney. The district attorney's office took the case seriously. They'd been looking at Mark for a while, it turned out. He'd written bad checks. He'd borrowed money under false pretenses. I wasn't his only victim. I was just his most convenient one. Through all of this, I kept teaching my 3rd graders. Well, I'd retired, but I was doing substitute work because I needed the income and because, honestly, being around kids was the only thing that felt normal anymore. 8-year-olds don't care about your financial troubles. They want to know if they can be line leader and whether you'll read them an extra chapter of the book. Their problems are simple. Their honesty is refreshing. When an 8-year-old asks if you're sad and you say yes, they accept that. They don't try to fix it or explain it away. They just give you a hug and go back to their math worksheet. One afternoon, about 2 months into the legal proceedings, I was sitting in Danny's room. I'd finally started going through his things, not packing them away, just touching them, remembering. I found an envelope in his desk drawer with my name on it. Inside was a card, the kind you buy for Mother's Day. It was signed but not mailed, like he'd been planning to give it to me in person. The message said, "Mom, thanks for always believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. You taught me that integrity matters more than anything. I hope I've made you proud." I sat on his bed and sobbed. Because yes, Danny had made me proud. Because his integrity had been real, unlike his father's. Because I'd raised a good human being who died too young. And because I realized that fighting Mark wasn't just about money, or houses, or credit scores. It was about honoring what I'd taught Danny. It was about proving that integrity does matter, that you don't just roll over when someone betrays you, that you stand up, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. The confrontation I'd been building toward happened at Mark's office, of all places. He'd asked to meet privately, said he wanted to discuss a settlement. Patricia advised against it, but I said I wanted to hear what he had to say. So we met in a conference room at his company, neutral territory. Mark sat across from me in his suit and tie, looking tired, but still trying to maintain that air of authority. "Susan, this has gotten out of hand," he started. "If we could just sit down reasonably, without lawyers, I think we could work something out." I let him talk. I let him pitch his vision of how we could move past this and start fresh. He talked about grief counseling and couples therapy and how we'd both been through so much that we weren't thinking clearly. Then I slid a folder across the table to him. Inside was every piece of evidence Patricia and I had compiled. The gambling losses, the identity theft, the fraudulent loans, the forged documents. Page after page of betrayal, documented and dated. "This is what thinking clearly looks like," I said. "You destroyed our family's financial future while I was grieving our son. You used Danny's identity to open credit cards. You stole from me, from your colleagues, from anyone who trusted you. And now you want me to be reasonable?" His face changed. The mask dropped. "You think you're going to win this?" he said, and his voice had an edge I'd never heard before. "You think anyone's going to care that I made some bad bets? This is Arizona. Gambling happens. We're in community property territory. You're on the hook for half these debts whether you like it or not." "Maybe," I said, "but the criminal charges for identity theft, those are all yours. The fraud charges, yours. The restraining order I'm filing to keep you away from any remaining assets, mine. You're about to find out what happens when someone fights back." I stood up. "And Mark, I'm not doing this because I hate you. I'm doing this because I loved you, and you turned that love into a weapon. You used my grief as camouflage while you destroyed everything. That's not something you come back from." I walked out of that conference room, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Power. Agency. The sense that I wasn't just being swept along by circumstances anymore. I was steering, I was fighting, and I was going to make sure he faced consequences, whatever form those consequences took. The legal process moved forward. Mark was charged with identity theft and fraud. His employer put him on administrative leave, pending investigation. Word got around. People in his industry talk. Suddenly, the man who'd built his reputation on being trustworthy, who'd closed million-dollar deals on a handshake, was known as the guy who'd gambled away his family's money and stolen his dead son's identity. His professional life imploded almost as fast as our personal one had. The criminal trial was set for 9 months out. In the meantime, we proceeded with the separation and eventual divorce. Patricia managed to get the house debt restructured, proving that I hadn't signed for most of it and that Mark had acted fraudulently. The bank agreed to a modified payment plan that I could actually afford on my substitute teaching income. It wasn't ideal, but it meant I wouldn't lose my mother's house. I wouldn't lose Danny's room. The credit card companies were harder. Some of them agreed to settle for less than the full balance when presented with evidence of fraud. Others insisted I was liable regardless. I ended up filing for bankruptcy protection, which hurt my credit, but at least stopped the collection calls. Patricia said it was the smart move, that I couldn't rebuild if I was drowning in debt that wasn't even mine to begin with. Mark's colleagues who he'd borrowed from, they were filing their own lawsuits, the loan sharks he'd gotten involved with. They were a whole different problem, one that the police had to handle. Turned out Mark had agreed to some pretty dangerous payment terms, which explained why he'd been so desperate to keep gambling. He'd been trying to win back enough to pay off people who don't take kindly to missed payments. The desperation had fed the addiction, which had fed the desperation, in an ugly spiral that had almost cost us everything. The trial, when it finally happened, was surreal. Sitting in a courtroom, listening to prosecutors detail how my husband had systematically defrauded me and others, it felt like they were talking about a stranger. The defense tried to paint Mark as a man overcome by grief, who'd made mistakes. The prosecution painted him as a calculating predator who'd used his wife's trauma as cover for criminal activity. I don't know which version was true. Maybe both. Maybe neither. Maybe people are more complicated than courtroom narratives allow for. The jury found him guilty on 6 counts of fraud and 2 counts of identity theft. The judge sentenced him to 5 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 3 if he completed gambling addiction treatment and paid restitution. He was also ordered to pay back everything he'd stolen or borrowed. Though realistically I knew I'd never see most of that money. You can't get blood from a stone, and Mark had already bled us dry. I watched him being led away in handcuffs, and I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication, Not even anger anymore, just a profound exhaustion. This man I'd built a life with, who I'd raised a child with, was going to prison. Our son was dead. Our home was barely saved. And I was 54 years old, starting over from scratch. If that's justice, it sure didn't feel like victory. But here's the thing. In the months that followed, something shifted. I started sleeping through the night again. I started eating real meals instead of just whatever was easiest. I started going to Danny's grave without dissolving into tears every time. The heaviness that had been crushing my chest since his death started to lift just a little. And I realized that the weight hadn't just been grief. Some of it had been the lie I'd been living. The pretense that everything was fine when it wasn't. The constant vigilance of trying to hold together something that was already broken. I sold Mark's car, which I was allowed to do as part of the asset division. I used that money to pay down some of the debt. I picked up more substitute teaching shifts. I started seeing a financial advisor who specialized in helping people rebuild after financial abuse. We created a budget, a savings plan, a timeline for recovery. It was going to take years, but it was honest years. Work I was doing for myself toward goals that were actually mine. One evening, about 6 months after Mark went to prison, I was sitting on my front porch. The same porch where he'd stood that night I changed the locks. The same porch where Danny had taken prom photos. The same porch my mother had sat on for 40 years. And I realized I was okay. Not healed, not over it, but okay. I had a home. I had work. I had friends who'd stuck by me through the absolute worst. I had a future, even if it wasn't the one I'd planned. A neighbor walked by, walking her dog, and waved. "How are you doing?" she called, and I said, "I'm good." And I meant it. Not good as in perfect or happy or any of those big emotional states, but good as in stable, as in moving forward, as in still here, still fighting, still standing. That anonymous woman who'd sent me the warning text? I never did learn her name. She testified at the trial, but requested anonymity for her own safety. But I sent her a letter through Patricia, thanking her, telling her that her courage had saved my life, even though she'd risked her own career and safety to help a stranger. Sometimes that's how it works. The person who saves you isn't who you expect. They're not your best friend or your family. They're someone who simply couldn't stand by and watch injustice happen. I think about that text message a lot. Don't sleep with your husband tonight. At the time, it felt like a bomb, like the worst possible news delivered in the worst possible way. But looking back, it was a gift. It was someone saying, "Wake up. You're in danger. You need to protect yourself." And even though the truth was devastating, knowing the truth was better than living the lie. Because you can't heal from something if you don't even know it's hurting you. Before I finish my story, I want to share something important I learned through all of this. Something that could help you if you're in a similar situation or know someone who is. I want to talk about how isolation works as a tactic in financial abuse, because it's something I wish I'd understood earlier. When someone is manipulating you financially, they often start by isolating you from information and support systems. In my case, Mark had slowly convinced me over the years that finances were too stressful for me, that I should let him handle everything. It seemed loving at the time. He was protecting me from worry, or so I thought. But what he was really doing was cutting me off from knowledge that would have revealed his betrayal much earlier. Financial abusers isolate their victims in specific ways. They discourage their partners from having independent bank accounts or credit cards. They insist on being the only one who pays bills or checks statements. They become defensive or angry when questions are asked about money. They refuse to share financial information, claiming it's private or too complicated. They may even criticize their partner's spending to justify keeping financial control. Every one of these tactics is a red flag. In my situation, after Danny died, Mark intensified this isolation. He told me not to worry about bills during my grief. He handled everything. What I didn't realize was that he was using my grief as cover to accelerate his theft. When you're in crisis, whether it's grief or illness or any other overwhelming situation, you're vulnerable. And financial abusers know that. They use your vulnerability as an opportunity. Here's what I wish someone had told me years ago. Financial transparency is not optional in a healthy relationship. You should always have access to all accounts. You should always know what assets exist and what debts are owed. You should always have money in your own name that your partner can't access. These aren't signs that you don't trust your partner. They're basic financial safety, like wearing a seatbelt. You do it because accidents happen, not because you're planning to crash. If someone is trying to isolate you financially, here are concrete steps you can take. First, open your own bank account at a different institution than where your joint accounts are held. Deposit at least some money there regularly, even if it's just $20 a paycheck. Have statements sent electronically to an email address only you control. Second, get copies of your credit report from all 3 bureaus annually. This is free, and it's how you'll spot accounts opened in your name without your knowledge. Third, keep important documents somewhere safe that your partner doesn't have access to. Birth certificates, social security cards, property deeds, insurance policies. A safe deposit box at a bank works, or at a trusted friend or family member's house. Fourth, and this is crucial, maintain connections to people outside your household. Financial abusers often try to cut their victims off from friends and family because those people might notice something's wrong. They might ask questions. They might encourage you to be more involved in financial decisions. If your partner is discouraging you from seeing friends or family, or criticizing the people in your life to drive wedges between you, that's a massive red flag. Fifth, educate yourself about basic finances. You don't need to become an accountant, but you should understand how to read a bank statement, what a credit score means, how loans and mortgages work. Knowledge is power, and the more you understand about money, the harder it is for someone to manipulate you. There are free financial literacy resources available through libraries, community centers, and online. Take advantage of them. If you suspect financial abuse is happening, document everything. Take photos of statements, save emails and text messages, write down dates and amounts. This documentation is crucial if you need to prove fraud or protect yourself legally. Store this evidence somewhere safe, somewhere your abuser can't access it and delete it. And here's perhaps the most important thing I learned. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. If your partner is being secretive about money, if accounts don't add up, if you're being told not to worry about finances in a way that feels controlling rather than protective, pay attention to that feeling. Your gut is trying to tell you something. Don't talk yourself out of it the way I did for too long. One statistic that really struck me during my research: according to studies on financial abuse, victims lose an average of $240,000 over the course of the abuse. $240,000, and many victims never recover financially. They end up in poverty, with ruined credit, unable to retire or buy homes. The financial damage can last decades beyond the relationship itself. That's why it's so critical to recognize the signs early and protect yourself. Another thing I learned is that financial abuse is often interconnected with other forms of abuse. If someone is controlling your money, they're often controlling other aspects of your life too. Your social connections, your mobility, your access to information. It's all part of the same pattern of domination and control. Financial abuse isn't just about greed. It's about power. It's about making someone dependent so they can't leave, can't question, can't fight back. If you're reading this or listening to this and recognizing your own situation, please know that you're not alone and it's not your fault. Abusers are skilled at manipulation. They're good at making you doubt yourself, at making their behavior seem normal or even caring. They often start slow, building trust before they start the real financial exploitation. That's why people who would never fall for a scam from a stranger can be completely blindsided by someone they love. Resources exist to help. The National Domestic Violence Hotline offers support for financial abuse at 1-800-799-7233. Many states have victim compensation funds that can help with expenses if you're escaping abuse. Legal aid organizations can help with divorce and asset protection for people who can't afford private attorneys. You don't have to navigate this alone. I also want to say something specifically to the people who might see someone else experiencing financial abuse. If you notice a friend or family member being isolated from financial decisions, if their partner won't let them work or controls all the money, if they seem anxious about spending or asking their partner about finances, speak up. Not in an accusatory way, but in a supportive one. Let them know you're there if they need help. Share information about resources. Sometimes the person being abused can't see what's happening because they're too close to it. An outside perspective can be life-saving. The other message I want to leave you with is this: financial abuse thrives in silence. Abusers count on their victims being too ashamed to tell anyone what's happening. They count on you believing you're the only one, that you're stupid for not seeing it sooner, that no one will believe you. But the truth is, financial abuse is common. It happens to people of all education levels, all income levels, all backgrounds. And the more we talk about it openly, the harder it becomes for abusers to operate in the shadows. I'm sharing my story not because I want sympathy or because I think I handled everything perfectly. I'm sharing it because silence almost cost me everything. Because if that anonymous text hadn't woken me up, I might have lost my home, my financial future, everything. And I don't want that to happen to someone else if sharing what I learned can prevent it. So here's my challenge to you. Have an honest conversation about money with your partner if you're in a relationship. Not an accusatory one, but a transparent one. Where are all the accounts? What debts exist? What's the plan if something happens to one of you? If your partner refuses to have this conversation, that tells you something important. Healthy partners want you to be informed and protected. They welcome your involvement in financial decisions. They don't hide or deflect or make you feel stupid for asking questions. And if you're the person with more financial knowledge or control in your relationship, make sure you're including your partner. Share information proactively. Encourage their involvement. Make sure they have access to everything. Because even if you have no bad intentions, life is unpredictable. People die, people get sick, people change. Your partner needs to be able to manage financially without you, just in case. That's not distrust. That's love. That's partnership. Thank you for staying with me through this entire story. I know it's been heavy. I know some of you are probably dealing with your own versions of this, and my heart goes out to you. But I also hope you can see that it's possible to survive this, to rebuild, to find peace on the other side, even when justice isn't perfect, and even when you've lost more than you thought you could bear. I'm sitting here in Phoenix, Arizona, in the house my mother left me, in the house I almost lost, and I'm okay. More than okay. I'm free. Free from the lies, from the manipulation, from the constant anxiety about money. I know exactly what I have, what I owe, and what my future looks like. It's not as comfortable as I'd planned. I'm working well into my supposed retirement years. I'm living on a much tighter budget than I'd expected. But it's honest. It's mine. And there's a freedom in that I wouldn't trade for anything. I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is there. Are you drinking your morning coffee or winding down for bed? Are you in your car, your kitchen, taking a walk? Drop a comment and let me know what city you're in. I love hearing from people all over who these stories reach. And if this story resonated with you, if it made you think or feel or recognize something in your own life, please consider hitting the like button. It helps more people find these stories, and you never know who might need to hear them. I'm convinced that anonymous woman found information about financial abuse somewhere that gave her the courage to reach out to me. Maybe this story will be that information for someone else. I want to hear from you in the comments too. What would you have done in my situation? Should I have confronted Mark earlier, or was waiting and gathering evidence the right move? Do you think the justice he faced was enough, or should there have been more consequences? There's no right answer, and I genuinely want to know what you think. Your perspectives help me process my own experience. If you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel. I share stories like this one regularly, stories about survival and justice